Hey, it's good to see you again. This is Warren on my back porch. Well, not my back porch, but my screen porch off of my kitchen. And today I want to talk to you about the short story, the fairy tale called God's Food. God's Food is from the Brothers Grimm, and it's about two sisters. And I want you to keep in mind as I read this is the most brief fairy tale that I know that the Brothers Grimm wrote. And I want you to keep in mind the idea of sibling rivalry. And if you've grown up in a family, or even if you haven't, if you've had friends who have siblings, you can see that siblings compete against each other. And this story is very brief. I think you'll probably want to watch the video a couple of times, especially the reading part of it, so that you can take good notes on it. And it'll be over in just very briefly. There were once upon a time two sisters. We got sister one and sister two. One who had no children and was rich, and the other had 5 and was a widow. So we've got no children, and rich, and the other sister has 5 children. She's a widow, so she has no help to raise her children, which happens a lot in life, right? So even though these stories are hundreds of years old, they apply to today. So she's a widow, she has 5 children. And she was so poor, she no longer had food enough to satisfy. And the conflict, one, is food. She no longer had enough food to satisfy herself and her children. And in her need, she went to her sister and said, "My children and I are suffering the greatest hunger. Thou art rich. Give me a mouthful of bread." Now I want you to think about what you would do in this circumstance. If one of your siblings came to you and said, "My family is going hungry. My children are going hungry." What would you do? I come from a family of 10 children. I know what my siblings would do. If I ever went to them and said, "I am going hungry," they would help me out. Just as an example, and I would too, as an example of that, back when I was in high school, my sister Anne, who was the middle child, had gotten married after she completed her bachelor degree in special education and got her teaching certificate. And she had gotten married to a man who was still in college, to Kim, and they had dated for years, and he had been away on a 2-year mission. But money was tight. They lived in a house that we would call it a tiny house now. That's how big it was. It looked like a shed, basically. And she was working hard, and he worked too, but he was also in school. And then she had a baby. And so they would have Sunday dinner at my parents' house where I lived at the time because I was in high school. Every single Sunday, they'd also come over for dinner on Wednesday because they didn't have enough money for the food that they needed. And I worked at a grocery store, and so every once in a while I would go shopping, and then I would strap the bag of groceries or bags of groceries to my motorcycle. I guess it was a motorcycle my father was lending me. And then I would drop it off those groceries at their house without knocking on the door. And my sister Anne asked me, probably about after the 3rd time, "Are you bringing us food?" And I told her, Nope. Now, 20 plus years later, after she was teaching my children music, because I didn't have children at the time when I was taking her groceries, and later on I had kids, and she was teaching them piano and violin. And she asked me, Warren, was that you who used to bring us groceries? I was like, well, yeah. Okay. Because you don't want to have to embarrass your family members, right? So the very rich sister, though, was as hard as a stone and said, I myself have nothing in this house. So I want you to think about that phrase. Nothing in this house. Now, it apparently looks like she has no food, and that's what she's going to claim. We'll see if that's true. And she drove away the poor creature with harsh words. So it's hard enough for people to ask for help. Can you imagine you ask for help and say, we are starving, and your sister tells you, you are a loser. You're a bad mother, you're a bad parent, you're a bad person. Get a job, slob. After some time, the husband of the richer sister came home and was just going to cut himself a piece of bread. You know, he's kind of like me. I like to snack on some carbs when I get home. But when he made the first cut in the loaf, out flowed red blood. When the woman saw that, she was terrified and told him what had occurred. He hurried away to help the widow and her children. But when he entered her room, he found her praying. She had her 2 younger children in her arms, and the 3 older ones were lying dead. He offered her food, but she answered, for earthly food have we no longer any desire. God has already satisfied the hunger of the 3 of us, and he will hearken to our supplication likewise. Scarcely had she uttered these words than the 2 little ones drew their last breath, whereupon her heart broke, and she sank down dead. And that's the whole story. All right? I want you to think about what this sister who was rich, who had all the money, what she could have done differently. Now her husband, who wants a snack, and obviously there's bread in the house, when the poor sister with the 5 children comes and says, can you give us anything to eat? In my house, I have nothing. There is nothing in this house. Her husband tries to take food over once he realizes what has happened, but it's too late. Already, her 3 oldest kids are dead. She has her 2 babies in her arms or on her lap, and once those 2 babies die, her heart breaks, and she dies too. So we have 6 people who die, and 1 person who is full of rudeness, having to live with that the rest of her life. Now I said, think about sibling rivalry. What is it that sister number 2 has that sister number 1 doesn't? She has the bucks. But what is it about, and she has a husband. What does the first sister have? She has no money. She has no husband. But she has been reproductively successful. She has 5 children. So perhaps the rich sister, and it is easier to become rich if you don't have a lot of children. You know, I remember in my family, and I was the youngest with my twin sister, okay? But I remember on paydays, because we all grew up working, and my older brother would get home with his paycheck, and he would say to one of my sisters, here's the $5 you lent me, and give her the $5 back. And she would turn to the next sibling, here's the $5 you lent me. And a lot of times that $5 would end up with the original person. But that's what we did, is we helped each other. Right? Now, whenever you read a story in Western culture that there's bread and blood, and the story is called God's food, which is a real big tip-off, right? What religious ritual consists of bread and blood? In formal terms, in Christianity, it's called the Eucharist, where the bread symbolizes the body of Jesus, and the wine, or grape juice if you're Protestant, which is very prevalent in our country, it symbolizes blood. It symbolizes sacrifice in order to help the greater good, in order to bring people at one, or atonement. Atonement. The rich sister does not want to be at one with her sister, and instead you have the husband coming home with a holy supper, is what it's called for many Protestants, or Last Supper might be a term that you use. There are other terms as well. But he's the one who is trying to eat that sacred meal, not his wife. And after having seen it, he tries to help, but he can't, because it's too late. So we can ask, what would be the moral of this story? Or morals of this story? I'm not going to tell you. You can think about that. You can come up with several probably. Thank you.